So is there any questions, any practical applications from Sebastis's research is the first one, and Catherine congratulating you on the award. So Sebastis, any practical applications?
Practical applications, we are actually working on some of the proposals which can lead to some of the practical applications, particularly for food waste reductions of
Okay.
what I just talked about. So we will see maybe in future.
Very good. Excellent. Right, just maybe while we're waiting for people, is there any comments from the speakers on some of the other speakers' talk? I know John, yourself, and you had a bit of a tic-tac there. Anything else that you disagree? I'm trying to get a bit of a fight going here.
No, I think it's all great. I think there's a lot of good consistency. I take both an academic and a practical perspective. Joost was very accurate in what he was describing, as were the other practitioners. It's critically important that we look at these problems from a 360 perspective, and we take all of the views and the comments, because they're all very valuable. Every angle is very valuable.
Okay.
One thing I would like to add, actually, going back to early with Brandon, I think to me as well, I think what Brandon said as well about how the value chain works and how it may not work for the farmers. I think that was for me as well kind of one of the highlights of today, apart from of course all the academic approaches that he had thought about at his scale. How can this work out for his community or for his industry? I think that was, to me, was also I think a very well thought through, practical, but also I would say scientifically profound approach. So thanks for that, Brandon.
Okay.
Yeah, the thing
sorry, Brandon. Sorry, John.
Yeah, I would add with Carl's presentation. So you have this centralized approach. You have a lot of stakeholders that are providing information. So the way Carl articulated, the pressure on them to look at blockchain because it's the shiny thing. I think he was very pragmatic in explaining how they're looking at it and how they're validating potential use cases. When you're in that position and you have something already in place, we know that one of the barriers to change is always the parochial nature. It's like, technology, whether we like it or not, is a religion. Either you have an Oracle religion or Microsoft religion or another religion, and we get into these really difficult religious type discussions. So I would applaud what Carol was doing and explaining how they're approaching this new technology and seeing if there are components of the overall platform where it may add value. That's the right approach.
And John, I don't know, it's difficult putting you on the spot. You don't understand the entire system. And I'm going to ask Carol more or less the same question. Can you see opportunities within that system now for blockchain? And Carol, I'm going to ask you after that is, after listening to all of today, do you now see new opportunities? Are you saying, I don't know? So John.
Specifically what Joost mentioned. Now I can pronounce Joost because I speak Dutch. But so what Joost mentioned is a very clear example of using blockchain with a smart contract, heavy on the smart contract side for pricing. So if you look at the bigger picture, you always have to look at what component of this is where a blockchain can add value. Agriculture in Ireland is a very sensitive topic. We know from the EU Transparency Project that they're trying to break down the power asymmetry. When you break down that power asymmetry between the trading partners, you give more power back to the farmers. So there are components of this, and Joost's project with Origin Trail or Trace Labs is one specific example. When you don't have trust with all of the trading partners, you have to look at examples in there where you could have a reputational risk or something else could happen, a legal liability. So for example, you may use a blockchain for credential management. So if a farmer or a group of farmers are a member of Carl's platform and they're all claiming that they're organic, if the information is coming from the farmer themselves, it may have lapsed, or there may be opportunism in the system. So this gets to the notion of authoritative source versus custodian source. So in other words, the farmer is not the owner of that organic certification or any other claim. They're a custodian source. So in context of Carl's platform, you should always look at getting the authoritative source to provide the data into the platform rather than getting it from someone who's a holder or what we call a custodian. And I think that's the area that could be explored. And if you go back to the financial crisis, by the way, in the financial crisis, one of the bigger issues is who actually owned the loans. So the identity of the banks was an issue. And you'll have this same problem at a smaller scale in Ireland or any other country with the legal identity that you're dealing with. Companies change, quite frequently, and in farming maybe less frequently, but there are mergers and acquisitions, and the legal identity of a farm, a farmer, a processor, producer is something that could be looked at for where blockchain can again come in from the authoritative source and verify the identity of that company.
Thanks, John. Carol?
Yeah, and I think, Donna, just to follow on and kind of from what John has been saying there, and certainly that idea of that authoritative source, and I think it was one of the ones we were looking at in terms of the farmer provides simple registration details that go to the Department of Agriculture, but when you pull the DNA into that, I mean, farmers by the nature, it can be a mistake, there can be a registration issue, whereas the DNA is, so while the farmer's saying this is the SAR, this is the dam, this is the sex, the authoritative source is that DNA record coming in and the genotype and using that. So I think that's definitely, it is important as to how you pull from different sources and make sure that they are the authority to speak that and to be able to validate that as well and to trace it through. I think coming back to your original question, where we see it, I mean, to me, again, I think the whole conversation today and certainly the experience that people have spoken about, again, it's that whole collaboration and cooperation. And I think if you have that, that's the starting point. It's again, and a lot of the people have spoken today, whether it's been John or Joost or Brendan, about, let's not replace a solution that we have with a technology. But I do think it's that trying to get people into that joined up way of thinking, and how can we build on what we have rather than trying to replace something. And I think taking that forward is, I go back and I look at the examples that Joost has mentioned today, that the circular one with Volvo or the smart cargo. Again, while they're very different, they're very much the same as agriculture. That there's a starting point, there's a timeline, and there's someone at the end. And can we replicate what's happening there? And how can we take what's maybe progressed in some of the other industries now and bring that back into the agriculture and say, what have they learned in smart cargo? What have they learned in other places that can be applied, and we don't have to go through necessarily all the pain to try and get there. And I'm sure John will have lots of input there in terms of things that have been learned in other industries, and can he see an opportunity for that to be replayed into Irish agriculture? And if we were to say in the morning to the industry, here's 2 things we need to do, what would those, what are those 2 things that he would see?
Yeah. I think when you look at components of the supply chain and the agriculture in Ireland, you look at what's observable and what's unobservable. And things that are observable by a third party would be unobservable by others. So again, if I go back to the example of a certification, a third party certification body going in to verify that a farmer is organic. In context of economic theory, we call that a credence claim, as I mentioned in my briefing, where it's unobservable, and a credence claim in context of a consumer means that they cannot verify it before or after. And let me use the example of USDA organic. So USDA organic sends a very strong signaling mechanism to trust, or a very strong signal to consumers of trust, and it becomes that proxy for trust. But when you have that strong signal USDA organic label, it actually becomes vulnerable for fraud. So, and this is something that I've looked at all around the world, where companies I did some research and lived in Borneo, Malaysian Borneo for a year. And those companies there that were placing USDA organic on the product because they knew they were unobservable by the people that were checking it. So there was fraud in the system. So when I'm talking to companies around the world, if I was talking to a company in Ireland, and if I was talking to 100 CEOs in agriculture, and one of them said, John, we ship products to let's say to the US or Canada or to China, I would say to them, do you know that 10% of your products are counterfeited? And their response to me would be shock, and they would go, how do you know that? And my answer to them was, how do you know it's not? So the whole notion of the unobservability when you ship a product into a market is crucial. And this is where in-market surveillance becomes very important. So from a reputation perspective, the Australians have this problem because Australia has a good reputation on the world market for their beef, right? And they ship a lot of beef to China. The problem is they have between $2 to $4 billion Australian dollars, 2 to 4 billion Australian dollars of fake Australian beef in the market. So these become very significant issues, and they become reputational issues because five-star chefs and consumers in China in particular were complaining about the high price of Australian prime beef and also the low quality. It's not Australian. So you have to do, this is why I talk often about systems thinking. We can't just look at one system. We have to look at all of the different systems and how they interact with each other. Similarly, you may have fraud and corruption on those products that are going to market. There may be a fraudulent transaction, and I worked with the New Zealand government on this and some traders. There was actually a company in either Australia or New Zealand that was shipping into China. But the reason they were shipping so successfully is because there was someone in the system that was bribing the customs officials to get those products into the market. So there's all sorts of things going on. I would encourage always to look at the systems thinking and how these different systems interact, because they can insert risk in from an unknown angle.
Yeah, and on that, Fiona, I'm not sure, have you got any additions to that?
It's a really interesting discussion and really great day, first of all. So thank you very much for including me. I would just like to make a comment on this idea of the external source. So in blockchain systems development, we would call that an oracle system, not oracle the company, oracle as in Greek oracle, source of truth, and not superstition, hopefully. And so that idea that there are, and this is important for the execution of blockchain smart contracts, that information can be inputted from an external source that could be organic certification information, or or the whole organic process is highly audited, and that's why it's so valuable. It takes 3 years for an organic farmer to achieve their certification. The consumer can check the currency of that certification and the certificate holder. It's not simple. Certainly in Ireland, they outsource it, I think, to a Swiss company. And I had to take a phone call to be talked through it. So it's not simple, but it is possible. And obviously, we know that in terms of systems and inputting information into systems, that can absolutely be streamlined. So there are analyzing your business process and what it is that you seek to do is the key, actually. Blockchain systems will just move data from point A to point B through a process. It is completely uncaring as to what that data is. It could be a cryptocurrency piece of information, or it could be something else. So they operate in a similar way, and it is the governance puzzle, or it is the business process or the value proposition proposal that needs to identify what those appropriate external sources are, which are then consulted through this oracleization process for smart contracts. So that's where the work is, defining what it is that you want to trace, how you want to do it with a blockchain, which is just one part of an enterprise system, is another matter, really. It's an important matter, but for the business side of it, the value proposition, what it is that you want to do to secure, to create trust, or to have this layer, a slice kind of across your business process, end to end, multi-party systems, and decentralized, identifying what information is important, how you can validate it. For example, talking about legal identifiers, the GLEAF organization with global LEAF certification for legal entities have partnered with Evernym, which is a blockchain company which creates identities for use in blockchain systems, and they have an open trust over IP consortium that people are invited to get involved in. So any of the researchers here are keen on that kind of topic, I'd encourage you to at least dip into some of their webinars and that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, I agree. I just, on the sort of blockchain side, I am wondering how much I've heard that is new. It's not new. It's not very old. It's not very mature, but neither is it new. And I think in terms of where we are in agriculture, identifying subject and object identifiers widely used within trade, within the system, within the industry, regardless of blockchain, that identifying those, maybe having a register of them in order to support semantic interoperability and structured data interoperability within agri-relevant systems is key. It's a key next step. You know, there's a lot of people in technology who are willing to develop and devise systems, but collaboration with domain expertise is really the next step. And I think John Keogh, for example, who has really, he steps across the worlds of supply chain and blockchain and technology, and is an absolute, you know, pioneering soldier, I think, in advancing cooperation across those industrial divides. Really leads by example, and that's what we need. You know, not having the same conversation about what's an oracle, what's a smart contract. It can be what you want it to be. It's important that the industry defines what the important business processes are and starts to create value with these systems.
Okay, thanks, Fiona. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to bring in Catherine Lascaressa. Catherine, you can introduce yourself, your past life and your current life. Catherine was commenting the whole way through. Catherine's very vocal, so she's opinionated. So Catherine, and a lot of questions you have in there were the ones I was going to throw to Brendan. So Brendan, I'm going to throw a lot of these ones to you as an end user. Catherine, what have you taken from today, and what are the big issues you think coming down from an industry perspective, an agri-industry perspective?
Yeah. Thank you, Donna. Donna, can you hear me?
Perfect.
Yeah, brilliant. I suppose, look, I'm a blockchain virgin, so Fiona scared the pants off me this morning. And it's no criticism of Fiona, because obviously I was in a slightly different league in terms of my understanding of the concept. But I've learned an enormous amount today, and the first thing I would say is that all the presentations were outstanding. A lot of huge amount of information thrown at me, but my conclusions would be that I've learned as much today about the potential of blockchain in the agri sector, and indeed any chain. The last comment that was made by Fiona just now, I relate to entirely. I think we need to focus as an agri sector. What do we want out of it, and what can we get out of it? And I think the limitations were very clear to me from what a lot of people said. I think I'm looking at this from a farmer's viewpoint, because in my immediate previous life, I worked for the Irish Farmers Association, and specifically looking after dairy farmers. And I know that, you know, farmers feel highly regulated. They feel that they have to meet with an enormous amount of obligation and compliance points, etc. And they're also already pretty well used to supplying information through you know, the various breeding databases, and ICBF indeed is very much at the core of that. And there is always a sensitivity relating to that information, and they feel that that information may be used against them, with some merit, with some truth, because we know that, you know, in the food chain there is always an attempt to by the next link in that chain to try and gain an advantage and to push back costs or obligations into the link immediately behind them. So if you look at, I can't remember who it was, I think it might have been John Keogh, who made mention of the fact that this could be misused by retailers, for example, for their own advantage, by highlighting the fact that, we know from the information available through this system that your cost of packaging is not what it could be, so therefore we're going to put pressure on your price. It's just an example of that. So I think there's quite a lot of education, of trust building. All of that has already been said by all your speakers, but it's become very obvious to me. I think we've a way to go, simply because there's a lot of education required, and it will ultimately need to be offering something positive and monetizable to the food chain, in my view, in Ireland. I think we have a strong case around sustainability, and while the science is what it is and it will not be replaced by blockchain, there may very well be ways in which you can actually better provide proof and evidence to consumers and to society at large, who at the end of the day are the voters, the taxpayers, the consumers, and the people whose view influence everything that comes the way of farmers in the finish. So look, massively interesting day. I have learned hugely. Thank you ever so much to all the speakers, and look, a very good day all around. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Catherine. And I'm just going to throw it to Brendan, and then I'll come back to the audience if there is any questions. So get your questions ready. Brendan, you talked a bit about sticks and carrots and things like this, and in Vista Milk, our scientific advisory committee, etc., have talked a lot about social science. So it comes back a bit to Carol's point about the DNA verification, and farmers need to understand that we're not necessarily out to try to get them, we're trying to help them. So if the calf is off the wrong sire, it's not hitting them with a stick, it's, oh, hold on now, we can help improve your data. Do you see a role for that?
Yeah, but only if the farmer understands the value of that, Donna, I would say. And I would say after today, I've a clearer picture that technology is not the roadblock here. There's a lot of technology and a lot of advances. It's motivation within the supply chain seems to be the core issue for me still, is that why would a farmer engage you in that process, Donna? And I don't think that's been thought out properly. I think the supply chain has key actors in it. I think the farmer is one of the critical points. There's a lot of critical points, but the farmer and the consumer, that, as I said earlier, the two critical points for me. And I think the motivation for farmers to engage in that process is not there at the moment, because it's not a fair and equitable supply chain they're entering into. So I think that the issues in Irish agriculture go way beyond something blockchain can actually solve. That would kind of be my conclusion of today. Blockchain is a technology, and I think I misconstrued your question earlier on, Donna. The farmer is doing a lot already, and Catherine just said it, and maybe they don't need blockchain. I think there's something else needed, and I think it comes down to some form of leadership within the farming sector itself that engages the supply chain in a different way. That kind of is the thoughts that's going through my head. I think blockchain does play a role at some point, but at the moment, all I can think of is that it's there's bigger issues in almost every supply chain, and John will probably go through a lot of different supply chains throughout the world that have these inequitable models that some of them don't have a future. Now, some of them are going quite well in Ireland, I think, and I think you're going to get an awful lot more engagement in these sort of technologies in the likes of the dairy industry, which Vista Milk are focusing on. When you look at other industries like beef, I think it's too frictionless for this type of technology to make any inroads into, until there's a change in motivations and a change in perspectives from. And I'm saying farmers are to blame as much as anyone else here. It's not other actors in the supply chain. Farmers have put themselves into a position where they're extremely vulnerable at the moment. And I kind of roll back on some of the stuff I said earlier. I don't see blockchain as an immediate short-term solution. I see it more as a long-term solution. The one thing I will take is that the other speakers have shown great technologies, but the thing that Carol showed there has the ability to connect a consumer with a farmer. Now, that ability to scan a steak and know where it comes from and know its profile, that type of technology could get retailers on side, which then could get other actors in the supply chain on side, which then could get farmers more engaged. And you'd be looking at real innovations then, like variable pricing models at a retail level based on better actions at a farm level. I think that's where blockchain gets really exciting for me, because that's where every actor in the supply chain has to get involved in it, and the farmer has motivation to get involved in it. So I think that what Carol showed there has huge potential going forward. It's just there's a few little chasms as some of the other people to jump across first.
As long as it contributes to higher cost, Brendan,
Yeah.
or higher prices in the
price, yeah,
in the supermarket, because it will
more equitable and fair model.
Any other
so maybe to Brendan's point, maybe the farmer doesn't need a blockchain, but the farmer needs becoming part of, maybe call it an infrastructure available to them to log, to search, to participate in something. So maybe a blockchain infrastructure is something that they should be provided for, where then of course there can happen innovation on top of that. I think that may be something where the farmers would definitely benefit, and they could add value to that. But I need a few innovators that make use of blockchain as a utility, not the blockchain itself. I think that's something which could help the different stakeholders in Ireland probably much more than just talking about the blockchain itself. But the blockchain as an infrastructure could lift, I think, the discussion and the value.
Good. Any questions from the audience? I have two questions, and my first one is, again, as a blockchain virgin. So let's assume, for example, Irish agriculture or farmers, producer groups, whatever, they develop a distributed ledger amongst themselves. And what stops, or is there any stop to a beef abattoir getting access to that data? Does there have to be a consensus? What are the rules associated with that? And my second question, and it's probably to John Keogh, on Brendan's point, can anybody give me an example where complete integrated supply chain has worked? I'm not talking just blockchain, worked in a situation that exists in Ireland in the beef industry, where you have 3 or 4 big players and your farmers are price takers, where their product goes off in the next few months. So they can't sit on their products and wait for the price to go up. Can anybody give me an example of that? And then the other one about what's the rules of engagement into a blockchain? Or do people know the question?
I can answer your first question very quickly. So there's 2 different, if you think of it as infrastructure, blockchain is an infrastructure. It's like the internet, like an app. Let's say like an app. If you want to, do you know that app where you can say the words of a song and it'll tell you what song that's from? So there's an app, Shazam it used to be called. I don't even think it's around anymore. And now I think you can do it on Google, right? That, unless the song is already in the database, you can't discover it. And if you don't have access to the app, Shazam, if you haven't downloaded it, or on Google now, if you don't have a Google account or if you don't have internet access, you can't use the service. So like, you actually already know the answer. Like every other enterprise system, there is an entry point, you know? So even with the public blockchain, where you can scan all the transactions that are written for Ethereum, that is global, you have no way of knowing which transaction came from where. It is a bunch of numbers. You don't know where it's from. You don't know. So that's the public blockchain. In a private consortium blockchain, the edges are hardened. You can't participate if you don't have the app, don't have the dashboard, haven't registered with the service. There's no way into it. That's not to say someone can't spoof your user ID or something, right? All other cybersecurity standards must apply, right? It's still only a computing system. But if you're talking about a private or consortium or permissioned blockchain system like Hyperledger or Corda or some of the ones that were named either by myself or in was it used maybe you talked about multi-chain and a bunch of other things. So these are open sourced, downloadable, blockchain services that you can deploy. So my proposal for my company is I can build a blockchain. I can use Ethereum. I don't need anybody to provide this service. But the European Commission is providing blockchain infrastructure. Nation states have to apply for it. I am seeking to encourage the Irish government to promote agriculture as the sectoral interest that will use this blockchain facility. The facilities and the infrastructure is provided for public sector enhancement. So it would have to be used by the department or public sector bodies, and it can reformat and redefine the interface between the communities using it, which is like the farmers or the consumers or supply chain actors, to basically enhance the single digital marketplace. So resources are there. They don't have to come from the National Treasury. It matters that we come together to pitch basically Ireland as a country that will run this node, which is then interoperable with the European system.
Okay, thanks, Fiona. And to the second question, anybody? Catherine has come in with something similar.
You were talking about specific supply chains, right? So I have at the end of my slide deck links to the 10-minute videos that we did as part of the Future of Food session. And in there are several use cases that companies are talking about. One is in France, where they're tracking for a very popular biscuit. They got 600 farmers with wheat, and now they're starting to move on to other ingredients that will be part of that. In Africa, they got 7,000 farmers using a blockchain with all of the challenges with no technology and infrastructure, and they're moving up to between 13 and 15,000 farmers. But if you take an approach, you look at Ireland, right? What would be the value? If you go back to the 3Ds that I mentioned earlier. So democratization. Democratization means that you're giving easy access. It's like getting access to Facebook, right? So when you're positioning something to farmers, they don't want something that's adding significant amount of cost. They need to be able to see the value. If I participate in this system, what can it give me? So the other D is decentralization. So if you can put a node at a farm, or the farmer can actually control the data that he has, and he can decide which ecosystems that he participates in, there could be value in that as well. And what Oracle is doing with Origin Trail is actually can facilitate that, where the node is on the farmer has all of the data, and he may participate in 5 or 6 different ecosystems or blockchains or related platforms. And the third one is the disintermediation. I think Brendan talked about this as well. Disintermediation is taking out the middle guy. Now there's 2 angles to this. One of those videos that I talked about is from the CEO of At the Fork, Marieke from the Netherlands. And she talks about her biggest fear is that the big companies, the Googles of the world, will do a land grab with the data. So disintermediation in that context of taking control and not letting the big guys control our life, that's one aspect. But from a market disintermediation perspective, it's the farmers or farmer cooperatives taking back control. Because correct me if I'm wrong, I've been a while now outside of Ireland, but it used to be the case where about 4 processors controlled all of the beef in Ireland, and they got the bulk of the profits. In the UK, I think there's 2 milk processors that control 50% of the market. So when you have situations like that, you have the potential for principal agent problems, principal being the buyer and the agents being the suppliers. And you have opportunism, and you have the biggest problem in that is the power asymmetry. So the disintermediation will help you to move away from that, and it can help the farmers and smaller cooperatives be able to provide a product to the market where they can give assurances that their product is, they can guarantee the journey of the product to the market. Now, as Paul mentioned earlier, part of the problem in rushing to building mobile apps is like having an insurance on your car. When consumers know you have it, or they can access it, they're fine with that. But the actual pickup of it is very low. So in Western countries, it's less than 6%. In China, they're incentivized to use apps like WhatsApp and other apps. They're incentivized to use the apps because they give away their data. So the usage of apps to query products in China is between 10 and 15%. Again, it's because of the incentive. So these become important discussions. If Brendan was to get together with a whole bunch of other farmers, and their consortium wanted to deliver fresh beef to all the counties in Ireland, then there would be a very strong value proposition where they could outline the complete journey from the different farms out to the market and everything they did. In that context, they're telling a story and they're being transparent on how the product got to the market. In New Zealand, when I was advising the government there, they did something very clever. And Ireland are equally as clever as New Zealand. In fact, I use Ireland as an example when I was advising the New Zealand government. So what New Zealand did, I think this is important, they created digital artifacts for all of the players to use for brand New Zealand. So regardless of which farmer, which industry you were in, if you were selling products from New Zealand to outside of New Zealand, you had artifacts which could be videos of farms, of videos of the sea, videos of the culture. So all of these artifacts were consistent because the most important point here was that they had a branding New Zealand, like brand Ireland. Now I know Ireland understands this because Ireland is very, very strong on this component. So I would say behind all of this needs to be a very strong country branding. And then you can slot in behind that and say, okay, how does my brand, my company brand, support that? Because if you're not supporting it, you're probably fighting against it. And by the way, when Walmart did some research a few years ago, and with an unsafe product, the consumer remembered the country of origin much longer than the company of origin. So this is why brand my country becomes very important. And again, as I said, I use Ireland as the example when I was advising New Zealand. So these are just things I'm throwing out. I think are very, very relevant.
Yeah,
maybe to John's second point, I think something we didn't touch today as well, but taking it further, I think he made a very valid point that today we're talking about blockchain and blockchain systems. Often we're talking still, I would say, one dimension, or let's say, pull it in one layer. So we're talking about a supply chain, and then we have powers in the supply chain. And this is where we start. But of course, over time, it's not about blockchain networks. Let's say not about the network. It's about having a node or being a node and participating in different blockchain networks. I think that's where we're going. And then, of course, what will happen is when you, to Fiona's point, if you don't have a node, you're not part of the world economy to a certain point. But if you're a node, then you can participate, and you can become more competitive because you can participate in different systems and different blockchain networks, and that in itself, that could as well democratize the way you can do global trade or regional trade. As such, so for a farmer, it could be to more regionalize his influence. For a country, it could be to more globalize your influence. But it's at the end of the day, it's about the networks, but it's also that you are a node, or that you have access to a node, and that node is part of different ecosystems. That's where we're going, but we're far from that. We're just starting to build the first systems, the first consortia, or the first systems of those who are like-minded and are all happy to do so. So but that's and so at the end of the day, it will follow that. I would say it's not a trade thing, but it's a collaborative trade network that we're trying to, you will see happening.
Okay.
Donna, just maybe back to your original question, just in terms of, and I think touches on Catherine's question about securing it and who has, I'm thinking of the example we had. So if you take Romy in Web Scientific and they do the genotype, the SNPs and the parental SNPs go on the chain. The consumer doesn't need to know about those. All they need to know was, have we DNA? Can we trace it back? So it's like turning on and off pieces of data relevant to the people participating in the chain. So I think that gives you that level of security and control as well, because Romy doesn't need to know about the pH in the abattoir, but maybe that's something that you want to know for research. So again, it's that idea of pieces being controlled and as the smart contract controlling that as well.
But my question, Carol, was who controls?
Well, so when I think that'll lead back to when you're putting the data on, you're deciding who can have this data and what they can do with it.
Okay.
But also exactly who governs in this point, for example, the smart contracts. If we take the point, it's also important because that is, of course, that sets how data is being shared in this permission blockchain at least, but also the smart contracts and the permissionless blockchains do, of course, they hold some of the rules. So you have to think about as well governance, who is making up those smart contracts, governance, who is onboarding, offboarding, who is even soliciting bad players in the network. So that governance is not there, but it starts, at least I would say, it starts with the rules that you apply. That you apply on the blockchain. But there's much more governance to come. And to Carl's point, a consumer is not interested, for example, in the SKU of a certain product. That may be interesting for the manufacturer or the assembler, but that doesn't mean anything, or the part number doesn't mean anything to a consumer. But the consumer might be interested in what was actually the guarantee warranty that is connected to that SKU, because that's value for the consumer. So it's important is actually what means data in parts of the value chain. That's something that you should expose.
Yeah. Okay, look.
Can I say one final thing?
Well, I was going to go quick round. So go on, Brendan. Yeah.
No, it was just on the consumer. It was mentioned numerous times. Everybody's right. They just want the warm, fuzzy feeling that when they purchase food, it meets the ethics that they have. The unfortunate thing is that a lot of those ethics are being violated and broken, and they don't know about it. So that's probably going to be a big driver in the future as well, is that the consumer is getting more aware as the years go by, and that could advance things quicker than we think.
Yeah, no, thanks, Brendan. Look, before I hand over to Francis, is there any concluding questions, urgent ones, or concluding comments or anything like that?
Donna, can I just address your idea of disintermediation there for the beef industry? When we look at the carbon footprint of protein, particularly meat, there is sometimes almost 50% loss of product from the supply chain between retail and consumer. So that's a lot of discarded product. Yeah. I think it benefits farmers to show that in carbon equivalence, it's not that half the herd died on the farm. It is post-farm gate. Business processes protect loss. And I think going forward, the consumer is interested in that. Now, I haven't worked out the business models. I don't have all the answers. But when we work together, when we find, a whole supply chain approach, there is a lot of information and there is a lot of product loss. And if we can get farmers interested in devising these new approaches, instead of it always being them being a price taker at the end of the supply chain, maybe they produce half the amount of meat and get paid the same because they're delivering into a system that protects the efficiency of the service. Okay, pie in the sky stuff there, but there's a lot of gains to be made.
Yeah, I would add, Donna, to that, we got in this position because of regulations. So regulations mandates one up, one down traceability. So what we've developed over the years, we've developed Fortress My Company So, and that fortress, my company, created data silos, and there was no incentive for companies to share information with their trading partners. So if you're 2 levels up the supply chain, you don't have a notion of what's going on. A blockchain that's properly architected can take away that problem and can help you to find and access information more rapidly, especially in cases where there's a consumer product safety issue. Now, most of the food safety standards that are out there will give you a guidance on how to do that within 4 hours. So it's not necessary to get down to 2.2 seconds, but to be able to access the information rapidly is currently an issue in industry today. So yes, blockchain can drive both efficiency and effectivity in supply chains, but we have to take a very sober approach to how we look at those projects. They have to be very specific to use cases, but lots of value for sure.